Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Chairman and CEO of Unisource Energy Corporation, Mr. Paul Bonavia, who will moderate our panel on the new energy innovation marketplace.
Cheryl. Welcome to the first panel of the day, the new energy innovation marketplace. And it's going to be an interesting group, I can tell you, just from our conversations getting ready in the last few minutes. So today's panel will consist of Cheryl Martin, Deputy Director for Commercialization of ARPA-E. Now, if we had an acronym test, I know you're all aware that that's the Advanced Research Projects Agency-Energy. Next to Cheryl is Paul Leggett, Executive Director in the Global Power and Utilities Group at Morgan Stanley. Next to Paul is Bill Conlon, Senior Vice President and Chief Engineer of Reva Solar. And at the far end of the group, Nick Akins, President and CEO of American Electric Power Company. Today we're going to talk about bringing new energy innovations to market. We're going to start at the very early stage of R&D through commercialization, including the importance of financing throughout the whole process, the role of the utility companies in helping to demonstrate and commercialize the technologies, and the importance of partners in getting new energy technologies out into the market. And here's the format. Each speaker will have about 5 minutes to present his or her thoughts on the topic. And following that, I'll ask a few questions, and then we'll take questions from the audience. And again, this is a technology smart group, so you know, and no doubt are delighted that the questions will be electronic only, either by text message or tweet. Send your questions through to the panel, and we'll see them on the screen, and we'll get right to them. So without taking more time, let's start in with ARPA-E, and Cheryl, please.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me here today. I've been at ARPA-E for 6 months, and very, very exciting. I'm stepping from 20 years in the chemical industry and a little bit in venture capital to working with advanced energy technologies. Let me explain a little bit for those of you who don't know us what ARPA-E is all about. We're a very, very new agency. We were envisioned as part of the Gathering Storm report by the National Academies back in 2006 to be modeled off of DARPA. And so we weren't very original with the name. But to really look at how do you move the same idea, how do you move technologies rapidly to the marketplace in the energy sector? Obviously with a big difference that DARPA has a very, very large, very significant customer. Here we have a much more diffuse customer set when we look at the energy sector. But I think we're seeing tremendous traction both with the broad private market as well as the military. I'll talk about that later. And so we were funded with the Recovery Act, with America Competes. We were funded under the Recovery Act money, $400 million. We currently have a budget of about $275 million. To date, we've moved about $500 million worth of 180 projects. There's diverse areas, everything from genetic reengineering of plants to help us get away from some of the issues with processing plants for fuel, to getting rid of the rare earth components of permanent magnets, to some areas I think are very much of interest to this audience, grid level storage. How do you do grid level storage at less than $100 per kilowatt hour? How do you develop the software and the hardware that you need to make the grid programmable and in all the dispatchable, in all the mannerisms of that? And also power conversion, the power conversion technologies out there. So we've had projects going for 3 years. We're starting to see some early successes. I'll give you some examples of those later. But for ARPA-E, we have a unique space between science and applied programs. ARPA-E uses 4 key metrics when evaluating a program. We don't ask first if it will work. We ask first, if it works, will it matter? And so it's a very much an agency that's funded around impact. And that's the first question we ask. What's the impact? How large is the market? And if we really make this development, will it matter? Then we look at where is it going to be transformative? Where are we going to not go down current learning curves, but potentially go down to a whole different place, developing batteries for electric vehicles, to the earlier video and discussion, that are going to be able to run at possibly a third the cost of today on no subsidy electric vehicle. Then we look at the whole idea, we bridge, again, science and technology. We bring together a lot of people who never thought about energy as the application for what they're doing, bringing together scientists, engineers, physicists, behavioral psychologists into some of our conversations. And then that speaks to our last metric of team. We very, very much focus and support teams, university teams, small businesses, large businesses, working together in groups. Again, the right dynamics of the team, I think as we all know from being in industry, is so important to moving something fast. I think finally my last point would be another distinguishing feature for ARPA-E is our focus on the market. We very, very much from the first day we put a contract together, ask our awardees to spend 5% of the money that we give them on technology to market activities. And in doing so, we actually ask them to put together a technology to market plan. And we call it that on purpose. I think we all recognize moving energy technology to the marketplace is not a short-term endeavor. So if you've got someone in a very small company thinking about their innovation, what do they need to do in the next 3 years? Who do they need to get to know from a network standpoint? What do they need to know about their market? Right? There's no way to move anything forward into a marketplace without knowing about that value chain and how it currently works. It's one thing to view yourself as going to be disruptive, but you should know exactly what you're getting yourself into. So we very, very much work to educate and inform and hopefully use the convening power of government for our awardees. So thank you.
Thank you. Paul, please.
Great. Thank you. Well, also, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and it was a pleasure to arrive today from New York and to see so many familiar faces in the building. I feel confident that every time we get a group like this together, good things always come out of it. So it's, again, a pleasure to be here today with all of you. I think today and throughout the course of this afternoon, you'll hear some about the challenges in the market. We certainly see it in the media. You hear it from financial institutions and so forth. What strikes me about that is those challenges have not stopped many of you in the audience from creating the technology, structures, innovative solutions, contracts, and ultimately jobs that have kept this industry going. So I wanted to thank many of you for that and for giving us a chance to work in this sector. I also wanted to start by level setting on some of the facts as they relate to the clean energy sector. And those are important because they frame the environment that we work in. First of all, despite what you may hear about some of those headwinds and challenges in the clean energy market, 2011 was actually a record year, $260 billion invested globally, up 5% over 2010. Venture capital investment up modestly, but still up at almost $9 billion globally. Importantly and relevant to some of the things that we'll talk about here in a minute, that venture capital amount spent was probably directionally more than the amount of investment capital that went into clean energy venture capital firms. So we will start to see some tension for those firms to raise new capital and therefore to show liquidity events to their LPs, and that is, I believe, relevant. The largest single type of investment category continues to be asset finance, or what we would call project finance. So while we referenced roughly $9 billion in the venture capital or earlier stage, those numbers for asset finance were $146 billion globally. So the real heft of whether or not we're creating the demand side comes from the project finance market. The cash grant program, which is now expired, funded a significant amount of installed capacity. The vast majority of those projects were in solar by number of projects. The vast number of the megawatts were in wind. Total tax equity need, most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with this concept. It's going to become very relevant, I believe, in 2012. Total tax equity need for 2012 is expected to exceed $7 billion, which may double the available supply. So demand's exceeding $7 billion, available supply maybe less than half of that from traditional sources. And that amount had peaked historically at $6 billion in 2007. Clearly, the end of the 1603 cash grant program causes a potential void in the capital structures that would have otherwise been less reliant on tax equity. And we're already starting to see some challenges as it relates to the markets that are affected by the PTC expiration in 2012. So with that, let me shift gears and talk a little bit about, I think what you've heard is financing of innovative technology or the development of the ideas of innovative technologies and some of the commercialization of it. In the middle stands the financing solution, which really does become critical in getting through what we call the valley of death. So I organized that into the five key questions that we'll typically address when thinking about financing innovative technologies. And these are ones that we would often come up in board conversations or otherwise. The first is, do we need a strategic partner? We are undoubtedly seeing growing interest from global conglomerates and industrial players in the clean energy sector. That interest continues to come from Japan and South Korea, but also increasingly from the US as well. And in fact, the most important of those strategic partners may ultimately end up to be the Department of Defense, and in turn, many of the current and existing defense contractors. For technology manufacturers and those focused on an IPO, I would certainly point out the importance of strategic partners, and in fact suggest to look at all of the clean energy IPOs that have occurred over the last 18 months and notice the common denominator of a pre-IPO strategic partner that serves a multitude of purposes. For those of you that are in utilities, IPPs, EPC contractors, these global conglomerates, I would say the strategic landscape is in play today, and many of those relationships that will be critical going forward in that strategic landscape are forming literally by the day, today included. So I think it's likely that we'll see more industry consortium outsourced investment platforms that will be created by those industries to outsource access to new technologies and many of the innovative technologies that you can see outside. And I think Nick will talk a little bit about more of that as well. Next is, when is the right time to file for an IPO? There's a lot of debate on this subject, and everyone is absolutely entitled to various opinions on it. But there are these growing tensions in the market for liquidity events. I think it's also worth noting, especially given where we are, some of the legislation that is making its way around that may make it easier for certain companies to file more quickly and on a more confidential basis. That's extremely helpful to those companies. All of that being stated, I tend to be of the view that you only make a first impression once, and getting on file at the right time when you have achieved those critical milestones, again, tends to be my preference versus getting on file and keeping the option value open for the IPO window to open. But by all means, getting access to capital is the highest priority, so however you go about it works. How do we become CapEx light? The term CapEx light refers to the preference many of growth investors to steer away from stories with extensive financing risk in this market. This is therefore a fairly common question in this environment, and certainly a relevant one as it relates to Valley of Death discussions. We are seeing a much greater focus on leveraging larger balance sheet, again, through these strategic partners, as well as licensing strategies that may, for instance, grant technology to international groups to build out those different geographic regions. What's an ideal use of proceeds through filing or otherwise getting access to capital? For equity, especially these days, it really is being able to demonstrate an inflection point in the business. Being able to demonstrate that with this incremental capital opens an entire new array of possibilities, international markets, proven technologies that are truly able to leverage that capital and create significant, defendable, credible, and easily pointed to shareholder value. And lastly, how do we maintain momentum absent access to the public markets? That question is really a summary of the four that I mentioned before. I'd say that we're working with a lot of our clients to think about IPO preparation, to target and think about the right strategic investors that they would possibly bring in, targeting critical milestones to build interest in the business, both from a financing purpose and to attract partners. And then ideally finding, if necessary, private capital to fund the business to cash flow break even if possible. So with that, I'll tell you that we are incredibly focused on looking for ways not just to participate in this industry, but to add value to the industry. And especially for our clients, and especially working with many of you. And it's going to be an interesting year, I think, from a financial markets perspective and from a technology innovation perspective. But we're glad to be part of it and glad to be able to spend this afternoon with you all. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Bill.
Well, I'm Bill Conlon. I'm with Reva Solar, which is a solar thermal technology company, and I think illustrates some of the things that Paul has been talking about. And to frame up this discussion on innovation and getting our technology to market, there's three areas I'd like to just briefly cover. One is who's Reva, what is solar thermal power, and then how is that applicable to utilities. You may know Reva as really a pure play in carbon-free energy. Our base is in nuclear power. We provide basically soup to nuts in this whole environment, design and construction of nuclear steam supply systems, and then a comprehensive fuel cycle from mining and fuel processing and assemblies to spent fuel recycling. But our group, Reva, also has a renewables business group that includes offshore wind turbines, biomass generation, a hydrogen storage and fuel cell operation, and lastly, Reva Solar. Reva Solar was originally a startup company. It's based in Mountain View, California, and we have a factory in Las Vegas. We have a 5-megawatt electric demonstration facility near Bakersfield, California, a 44-megawatt electric project underway in Australia and Queensland. And we just recently announced a 5-megawatt electric solar booster to an existing power station owned by Tucson Electric Power. So what is solar thermal power? Well, solar thermal, also known as CSP or concentrating solar power, uses mirrors to reflect and concentrate sunlight onto a collector to create steam that ultimately drives a steam turbine generator to produce electric power. So solar thermal has some inherent thermal storage in it, in the mass of steel and water that exists in the system, and consequently is less susceptible to intermittency, wind quieting in wind turbines or clouds that come over PV fields. So it's less susceptible and is consequently a little bit more grid-friendly than a PV system. There are a variety of solar thermal technologies in commercial use, parabolic trough towers, and then the newest entry to the commercial marketplace is a linear Fresnel system, which is the technology that we use. They're distinguished by various technical features, whether they're liner point focus, the steam temperature that they can produce, the optical efficiency, and other characteristics. But really all of them are aimed at how do we produce energy at the lowest levelized cost of energy. So the Reva Solar technology, called Compact Linear Fresnel Reflector, or CLFR, is comprised of long arrays of flat glass mirrors, and these individually move throughout the day to track and focus sunlight onto an elevated boiler. And that heat is used to directly produce high-pressure superheated steam needed to drive a steam turbine. So our systems are modular. They're typically about 7 megawatts electric equivalent capacity per module, and we put multiple modules together in order to meet whatever capacity demand is required by a customer. So these steam generators, they're made from steel, glass, and concrete. The concept is elegant and simple, and hence we believe cheaper than the competition. Our key innovation has been to cost-effectively deliver high-temperature superheated steam throughout the entire operating day, and that's what's needed to efficiently produce electricity. So now how is this applicable to utilities? Well, steam power, of course, accounts for the majority of electric power generation, whether the heat source is coal, gas, the exhaust, the flue gases from a gas turbine in a combined cycle power plant, nuclear fission, or the sun. So direct steam generation, as we produce it, is a natural fit for utilities. So the most immediate and cost-effective application for this kind of technology is actually boosting or increasing the capacity of existing thermal assets, coal and gas-fired stations. And most plants, most of these existing thermal plants, have the ability to take additional capacity and turn that into green electricity. So it's really a form of hybridization that leverages the existing capital and infrastructure. As we look at the future, we see that these boosting processes can only take maybe 5 to 8% additional electricity production. And so to go beyond that requires another level of innovation, things like an integrated solar combined cycle that might take 20% solar electricity, and then other processes, other designs in the future that would go perhaps all the way up to 100% solar capacity. And there would be a mix of attributes that would depend on the utility's particular needs and appetite. So we think that this is a great opportunity. It's an example of how we got our technology out to market to customers like Tucson, CS Energy in Australia, and we expect others as well. Thank you very much.
Nick, please.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. American Electric Power is, we serve 11 states, over 5 million customers, and we sort of have a proud history of technological innovation. We're 106 years old, which I guess we're sort of the dinosaur of the bunch here, but nevertheless, and historically, the innovation's been centered on central station type generation, the first supercritical in the U.S., the first ultra supercritical coal plant in the U.S., the first 765 kV transmission, the first fully integrated carbon capture and storage system in the world. Those are the kinds of things that we've advanced considerably. But AEP is much more than that. We are very much focused on issues of the smart grid and doing a very credible project. Matter of fact, it was the 2012 Smart Grid Project of the Year. Distributech gave us that honor. It's a pretty large project in Ohio with about 100,000 customers, $150 million project. 75 million of it was funded by the DOE. And it really is making considerable progress on where we go in the future. Because when I've been in this business 29 years, and when we first went through the planning operation in this business, it was really a decision of where the next central station generation was going to be and what kind it was. Today, the planning process is so much different. We're focused on not only those types of resources, but transmission, but also at the customer end in terms of efficiencies on the distribution grid and on the customer side of the meter. So this Grid Smart program, that's our version of the Smart Grid program, by the way. So I'm not getting it backwards. So it really is. So when I call it Grid Smart, that's what it is. But it is a project that we're very, very proud of. We have our own labs, our Dolan laboratories, where we analyze different types of technologies, and it really has provided a great opportunity for us to not only evaluate multiple technologies across the board, but also look at the field testing applicability of some of these technologies. So we obviously have moved to the distribution grid management systems, where we can really focus on better operational control of the grid in automatic fashion to enable more restoration of service, less outage time. Integrated volt VAR control is something that we're very focused on because it does provide considerable efficiency. We're seeing 2 to 3% efficiency reduction as a result. And that's pretty credible, from a fuel cost perspective and from an overall system perspective. 2 to 3% is pretty substantial. We verified that through Battelle. Community energy storage is something else that I'm very excited about because whenever you have the battery technologies advancing to the point where you can really ride the peaks, the peak periods, but also allow customers to have even a more substantial process of keeping their electricity on even during outage periods. Right now we're testing up to 5 hours connected community energy storage systems with 2 to 3 homes that we would keep operating during a period of time. Advanced smart meters obviously are being installed across the board, over 1 million meters in Texas, but in Ohio, certainly we have a lot going in place for those 100,000 customers. We're also testing plug-in electric vehicles. We're field testing plug-in electric vehicles and also the charging stations at our Dolan labs to ensure that they're really worthy of being out there in an industrial type of situation. We're also focusing very much on cybersecurity. We're partnering with Lockheed Martin on some state-of-the-art type analysis of encroachments in the system, and that occurs as we speak. You'd be surprised how many encroachments we try to get and where they're coming from. But a big part of the process we're going through is that cybersecurity effort, and you're going to hear more about that on the electric grid, but also from a customer standpoint as well. So it's not just about Ohio, though. As I said earlier, we're in 11 states. In AP, Texas, over 1 million smart meters. In Oklahoma, our public service company of Oklahoma subsidiaries integrating AMI meters, distribution management, volt-var optimization, consumer programs, different types of pricing technologies to enable customers to make wiser choices. In South Bend, Indiana, we have another pilot that's occurring there. That's testing AMI and other technologies. So this is happening across the country, and in most of our jurisdictions, our state jurisdictions, were much lower prices than you would find in the Northeast or in California. We're probably about half the price of those parts of the country. But customers are still interested in understanding what's going on their side of the meter, and I think the more that we're able to communicate and enable customers to communicate, the better off we'll all be from an efficiency standpoint across the system. In the meantime, though, from a transparent standpoint, we'll focus on things behind the meter, such as integrated volt-var control, those kinds of restoration type activities that can occur quickly over advanced switching and those types of things. So we're also we decided that we weren't really a technology producer. We don't develop technologies. But we had several companies approaching us to want to use our system for the evaluation of their basically benchtop type technologies. And if you want to really advance them from benchtop to an industrial environment, they really do need to be field tested. So we were getting a lot of requests, so we decided, well, we're not a developer of technology, we're a user of technology. So we engaged in the Bramer funds, we invested in that. Our Chief Operating Officer, Bob Powers, is on the advisory board of that particular effort. And it really gives us a window into the VC type of look at different types of technologies. And it's unbiased and clearly an area where we can take that input and decide where we invest, but also be hosts for the analysis of different types of technologies. We found that very, very favorable. And actually, at this conference already, 2 or 3 other funds have approached me about that. And you can see that the vibrancy of that kind of financial engine, but also the innovation of technologies on the consumer side is really picking up. And there's a lot of interest in that. So as the other issue that we have to overcome, many of our utilities are investor-owned utilities, fully integrated utilities. So it's really up to the regulator whether we can recover the costs associated with moving these from benchtop to commercial scale. And one of the things we find challenging is there's a lot of infrastructure development, a lot of capital requirements that are included for the existing system. So it's a tough decision for commissions to make whether we get cost recovery for those types of activities. So what we're trying to do is work with the commissions so that they do understand the value of what it is we're trying to do, decide what are the best technologies, Certainly integrated volt-var control, community energy storage are looking very positive. On the consumer side, we're still working to develop and really have to report back to the commissions as to what the value of those particular efforts are. But we do plan on doing that very soon, and I think it'll be a point where the commission really needs to decide how progressive do we need to be. In particular, when you do go from the scale of just an idea or benchtop, you really do need to have that kind of effort and that kind of support so that we can advance the technologies to more of an industrial scale. So that's what we're doing with that effort. So it really is an end-to-end effort from an efficiency all the way from the generation side through through the customer side, but also trying to address some of the financial aspects, because those are clearly just as important as the technological issues themselves.
Thank you, Nick. Well, those are very impressive introductions. Nick, I really like the grid smart. Now that's very impressive. Know you all want to get to Q&A. Before we do that, though, we've got an example here, a short video clip, and it shows Areva's solar compact linear Fresnel reflector technology. That's the steam generating technology that they're installing on what truly was a dinosaur. I don't know what you'd quite call it, what species you'd call it today, but this is a power plant that was built when I was in kindergarten. It was a steam-fired electric, good old-fashioned gas-fired steamer power plant, which, in accordance with federal directives in the early 1980s, was modified to allow it to burn coal. Coal was the fuel of the future, as it was seen then. Subsequently, it was modified again so that it can burn landfill gas, and now it is going to accept steam from Areva's technology. So it is a four-fuel plant, and that steam will displace natural gas, which is the primary fuel again today. And the plant is surrounded, dinosaur though it may be, with a solar test field in which we've got dozens of different photovoltaic technologies, this being Southern Arizona. It's a good place to test them, which are on real-time telemetry with the College of Science and College of Engineering at the University of Arizona. So they're collecting real-time continuous data from 40 or 50 different technologies at the site. So our old dinosaur has learned to see, gotten some new tricks and to see a new day. Hope you enjoy the clip. Please watch. Thanks. Energy innovation is such an interesting area, and as we listen to this, we realize there's this whole food chain from an idea to commercialization to the market, lots of different players, and lots of art and science together here, research, data, technology, engineering, good timing, maybe even some good luck, and we're all trying to figure out how to get those things together in the right combination. So if we may, let's dive in and start, Cheryl, with you, since you were involved in very early stages of R&D. And let's start out with a comment that I have now heard from two different members of Congress in the last 24 hours, which is they solemnly tell us that the government shouldn't pick winners and losers. And the question to you is, how do you select the projects that you work with?
Well, we certainly don't pick winners and losers. We actually start a couple ways. One of the most important ones for us, and it was how we founded ARPA-E, is an open solicitation. We basically put out a solicitation, and we have one on the street today that says, in the energy sector, based on the properties of an ARPA-E type project, what do you think we should fund? And that allows us to see anything and everything. And then we evaluate those with review teams and get new ideas about what to fund. So those are very, very useful, the outside in. As well, we've done 11 focus funding opportunities. And those start with the fact that we're all out talking to folks like yourselves all the time and trying to assess where are their white spaces. A program director would come in with an idea, and the first thing we do is hold a workshop. We go out and call together experts in the field, in side fields, university, government, industry, and bring those folks together for a day of really throwing the idea against the wall and saying, where are there ARPA-E-like places? Because at the end of the day, when we bring it back in-house and decide to put out a funding opportunity, we're technology agnostic. So when we put out battery for electric vehicle program, we got seven different technologies we funded for those batteries, for example. And so we set the metric that matters, and then the technologies, come behind that.
Yeah, very impressive and a good answer to the government shouldn't pick winners and losers.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is, as you learn, more things become possible. And that's why it's really, really important to have an open mind and to be out there with what's going on in both the academic as well as the industrial world.
And as a follow-up to that, how do you measure success?
Well, I think for us, I think one of the first success metrics we came out with was follow-on funding, right? In our first 120 projects, we were able to speak to the fact about 11 of the ones we'd funded, $40 million worth, had attained $200 million of follow-on funding. Now, that's a great metric. We're very, very proud of it, but it's an insufficient metric. Because if you look across the energy sector, not everything that succeeds is going to become its own company.
Right.
And so what I've been working to do with our teams is to say, well, what are the markets? What's going to happen? You might have purchase by a strategic. You might have a licensing agreement. You might have a joint development agreement. You might have the Navy step in and want to harden an air conditioning system for naval uses. We may have pickup by an applied division to take it down the market. Any of those are possible. It's also possible that we may decide with a technical team to stop the project. We actually have that right the way we do our agreements. And the sooner we know that something's not going productively, we can stop it. Life's short. We should work on things that are really going to matter. And for me, the only thing that's really important for us is to look at what's right for the areas we fund. And that's where we really like to engage the community like this about what's possible. And we're needing to do demonstration projects. We heard about some of those possibilities, but challenges.
The answer you just gave answers yet another one that I think a lot of us wonder, and that is, how do you decide when to hand off a project? And it sounds to me as though you've described lots of different avenues that a given project might go down.
Yeah, exactly. It's why we want to have the conversation right from the beginning with anyone that we're funding. Where do you think you want to go? And and what's possible about getting there. If you're an academic professor, maybe you do think licensing is the best thing, but we've certainly seen examples. For example, up at CUNY, they're doing manganese dioxide batteries, and they've made tremendous improvements, and they're actually at the point they're going to spin that out as a company. They're working to do that funding today. I'm not sure at the beginning they thought that's what they wanted to do, but as it became possible, and they started thinking about, we could do this, and it's a space that fits. So I think you really have to work with them, work with the market, and show them the options.
Right. Makes a lot of sense to me. And taking up that topic of handoffs, let's go to Paul, if we may. You mentioned that when you work with companies, you're helping them obviously get access to capital, but really a similar question to what Cheryl addressed, and that is, what are you looking for? How do you decide who's a good one to work with and what's likely to succeed?
Fair enough. Well, I did a top 5 list before, so maybe I'll try to stick to that theme if I can. The answer is, it's fairly straightforward in many ways. It's execution of it that is a little bit trickier. But the answer would be certainly differentiated technology comes first and foremost. And then from there, I think barriers to entry, yes. But on the flip side of that, limited barriers to commercialization, especially at scale. Next would be a large addressable market. I think that's what got the biofuels, a lot of the next generation biofuels and biochemicals run over the past 18 months. The fourth would be to credibly either create or defend margins going forward in a way that we can really articulate and explain well to investors. And then lastly would be, I would tend to use this word a lot lately now that I realize it, the ecosystem around the company, which is formed, of course, first and foremost by the management team, and then secondly by the board of directors / investors and the strategic partners associated with it. So that's the short answer. I think the other part of that is, of course, we don't just we don't unilaterally decide who we work with. They hopefully pick us as well. And so as groups go in to make that decision, I think it's critical for both from our perspective and from theirs that we have a similar view of the world, or at least a relationship where we can speak honestly and constructively about how we think something gets done successfully, rather than necessarily painting a picture that is what they or their board want to hear. And that's really the ideal relationship from my perspective, where I feel like we do have that type of relationship and we're able to add value in that way.
Terrific. You mentioned in your earlier remarks that project or asset-based financing is this very large increment that comes in after the venture capital. Do you work pretty closely with venture capital firms to get that pipeline of clients coming in?
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm glad you brought that up, because to say that the size of the project finance market is so much larger is accurate. To say that it creates demand that's critical to many of the innovative technologies and the venture capitalist companies that back them is accurate. What I'm not saying is that one source of capital is necessarily more important than the other. They have each have their place in the life cycle of a business. But yes, we have what I think are very strong relationships with the venture capitalist community, and I would say a really significant level of respect for what they bring to the table and the role that they play in not only identifying who they think will be winners, which is part of the market at work, but they're not just a source of capital. They provide a lot of other benefits, whether it's relationships to financial institutions or strategic partners or customers. That's also a little bit of a strategic benefit, so sources of capital, strategic benefits, and being part of that ecosystem. But I also I wouldn't discount their technological expertise as well. There are many venture capitalists and individuals who work at those organizations who are incredibly skilled and capable and fantastic engineers, And they are, like I said, they're part of the market at work, and they truly do, I think, add a lot to the companies that they invest in, especially if structured appropriately.
Great, thanks. Well, let's take one that came from the audience and address it to Bill, if we may. Bill, you're a real-world example of a startup that's in the commercialization phase. How did that happen? How did it become a good idea, become a Reva Solar, and what was the transition point?
Well, I think almost every technology that we're going to look at to get into the utility marketplace, there's a whole set of things that have to happen. The first is that it has to work. And how do you prove that it works? It continues to work. It continues to perform. In our case, a large amount of venture capital and many hundreds of person years of effort went into a demonstration facility in Bakersfield. And that allowed us to develop the technology to a stage where it was of interest to a large number of potential customers. But having a technology does not get you a customer. The next step is really to have the financial strength to assure customers that you can deliver the technology and that you'll stand behind it. And so that's really the transition for us from a startup company to the acquisition by Reva. It could bring parent company guarantees, but more than that, it could bring project management, construction, a global supply chain, and then the quality and safety culture that utilities require. Then the next step really is to have a willing customer, a customer who will take the lead. And we are very fortunate to have Tucson Electric Power take the lead for us. And then for them to take the lead and for other utilities to follow on and turn this from a demonstration project into a potentially large marketplace requires then a policy framework that includes things like the 1603 Treasury Grant or renewable portfolio standards or something like that. So it's really a multi-staged process, and we are still in the middle of it.
Well, we know now the importance of brilliant selection of customers to the overall effort. If I might turn to Nick. Nick, you mentioned, you talked about partnership with a tech venture capital firm from a traditional company like American Electric Power. That's something truly different. How does that help you advance the objectives that you talked about earlier?
It helps tremendously. By the way, Bill, I'm glad you brought up solar. There's a lot of, you're going to do well because we did a purchase power arrangement with a solar farm in Ohio. If you can have solar in Ohio, you can have it anywhere. We engaged the venture capital firm because we get so many different types of ideas. I mean, you'd be amazed how many ideas come into the companies because they're looking for hosts. And you really have to think about and prioritize what are the projects that make sense. And the venture capital side of things, as I said earlier, provides that window, but it does it in sort of a dispassionate way that's unbiased. And clearly, if they see opportunities for investment in companies that are really good ideas, then that's really a mechanism that we can filter through them and make sure that when you move to that benchtop to commercial scale, we're really using our time efficiently and money efficiently to invest in the right technologies. Because in the future, we're going to wind up in a situation where customers are going to want different things. And from a retail standpoint, it really can provide a platform for technologies on our system, but we just need to be mindful of which ones clearly are the winners as we go forward.
Well, great. One of the things we've talked about is the importance of financing, obviously, and we talked about production tax credits and the refundable credits and the role of tax equity. And for those who are particularly concerned with whether there really will be funding out there to advance technology, I guess, Paul, I'd start with you, but invite anybody else to comment on whether, with all the changes in tax laws and federal policy that may be in the offing, is there a healthy capital market out there for innovators to access?
It's a great question, and really 2012 will be a defining year, I think, in the evolution of this industry that we're all fortunate to participate in, and a lot of that will still be driven by policymakers. We talk a lot about grid parity and about the opportunities for the industry to stand on its own. That is coming. But in the interim, there is a period of time where policy will be critical to help drive this industry. I mentioned the expiration of the 1603 program. That program was meaningfully and significantly positive for many of our clients that took part in that program. So yes, the expiration of that project will have a negative effect on it. I could go on about some of the challenges as it relates to the policy or lack thereof, possibly in 2012. On a positive note, and maybe a lot of what you're seeing by the participation not only in this panel but some of the other panels, I'm increasingly confident that the private sector is stepping in to fill that void, and that's because of a lot of reasons. And a lot of those reasons have evolved over time. You don't hear as much when we get a chance to do meetings and strategy meetings with CEOs of utilities or IPPs, et cetera. The conversation has shifted from one of image or green jobs, et cetera. It's shifted to how do we think strategically about our business for the long term? How do we minimize impacts and exposure to the commodities markets? How do we create value for our shareholders? What's the ROI on that project? What is the IRR on the project? What type of value am I going to be able to talk to shareholders about on my next call? And that's where we all ultimately want the business to be. And so setting aside grid parity and all of those terms, the fact that we have those meaningfully important and senior level conversations now about the viability of clean energy projects to truly deliver shareholder value and help communicate senior management's focus on building a business for the future, that's great. That means to me we're partway transitioning, I think, through a reliance on policy that will be likely challenging in 2012.
Encouraging remarks. Well, we're getting close to the end, but there is one question that has come up in various forums from the audience, and one that was on my mind as well. And maybe I could start with Nick on this one. The question is, from the standpoint of a regulated company or of one of the technology innovators, is our regulatory system really capable of providing the right incentives and the right foundation to encourage innovation?
I think ultimately we have to look at the cost, the ultimate cost that's borne by consumers, and that's always an issue, particularly when we have $2 trillion of investment that need to be made on the electric grid itself for refurbishment over the next 2 decades. So commissions are having to deal with those kinds of costs. I think the most important thing, and you're probably going to get me on my soapbox here, but we do need an energy policy in this country that's all the above, truly all of the above, that advances technology, because there has to be a place for the advancement of clean energy technologies. I mean, we have a natural progression that's occurring, and if we continue to advance and prioritize these technological advancements that we can make from a clean energy standpoint, it's going to make a lot of sense. So I think the regulatory, whether it's regulatory jurisdictions or competitive jurisdictions, it won't matter if you have an energy policy that's coherent, consistent, that makes sense, that we can all invest and depend on making wise investments and prioritizing based upon.
I see lots of assent being indicated. Bill, Paul, Cheryl, anything in particular to add to that?
Yes, indeed. And I think in terms of this, costs need to be fully evaluated, and we need to consider ancillary services. Does carbon have a cost or a value? There are many aspects, and all of these renewable technologies address one or more of those issues, and we need to make sure that we properly credit them and debit them.
Other remarks? Well, that brings us to the end of our time. I wish we had another half an hour. This is very interesting. We'll have to get together and have a reunion of this group and see how we've done. I've certainly learned a lot. Thank you all to the panelists, and thank you to the audience for very interesting questions. We're done.